Someone saw her standing between the rows of a farm field at midnight, just standing there among the crops doing nothing. Someone else saw her at their door in the early hours, just standing on the other side of the screen, completely still. Hey, welcome. Just get comfortable for a bit. You don't really have to do anything. Just relax and listen. I've got some horror stories for you tonight. And in the background, it's just slow, haunting beauty of Ghost of Tsushima. Mikawa Prefecture, Japan, Spring, 1289. 2 clans, 1 hatred, and this is where it all began. The Kuroha were ninja, shadow people, the kind that villages pretended didn't exist because pretending was safer than acknowledging them. They moved through darkness like darkness was their home, which it basically was. The Akaishi were samurai, proud and loud about their honor in the way people are loud about things they're afraid of losing. These 2 clans had been circling each other for 3 generations, neither strong enough to finish the other, neither willing to stop trying. Then the Kuroha leader got sick. Bad sick. The kind where everyone in the clan knew what was coming but nobody said it out loud. The Akaishi said it out loud, just not to them. They came before dawn on a night with no moon, which tells you everything about how honorable this actually was. Akaishi soldiers surrounded the hidden Kuroha village from all 4 sides while the ninja clan slept. No warnings, no formal declaration, just fire and steel arriving at the same time from every direction. Shadows ran and got cut down. Warriors who managed to grab weapons got dragged into the open and killed there. The children and elders, and I'll just say this plainly, were not spared. By the time the sun came up, the Kuroha were gone. 3 generations of a clan, finished before breakfast. The Akaishi commander walked through the ruins feeling the particular satisfaction of a problem permanently solved. He sent his men to search the remains. Weapons, documents, anything worth taking. They came back with one problem. The Kuroha leader's armor was missing. Black lacquered plate, older than anyone could trace, and feared in a way that armor usually isn't. Stories about it varied, but they agreed on the basics. It moved without sound. It disappeared in darkness. No blade had ever marked it. The commander searched the ruins himself and found nothing. He told his men it probably burned. He didn't believe that when he said it. Now here's the part that matters. The part nobody was supposed to survive. Run was low-ranking Kuroha. Not a great fighter, not important enough for anyone to prioritize killing in the chaos. He had hidden in a space beneath the floor of the storage building and stayed there while everything above him burned, breathing through a crack in the boards, listening to sounds he would never fully describe to anyone for the rest of his life. He crawled out when the soldiers left. 3 days later, half-burned and starving and moving through forest on instinct more than intention, he found the shrine. Old place, forgotten, the kind of building that forests slowly eat over decades. Roots pulling at the foundation, moss covering everything. Inside, broken statues, torn banners, the smell of cold stone and standing time. He almost didn't notice the armor because it was so dark in the back corner and he was barely conscious. Then he saw it, standing upright, freestanding, no rack, no wall support, just standing there in the dark like it had been placed that way deliberately, like it had been waiting. Don't skip this next part. This is exactly where everything starts going wrong. The air around it was cold in a way that had nothing to do with the season. The room felt smaller near it, like the space was being used for something. Ren's body started shaking and he hadn't told it to do that. He stood there for a long time just looking at it. He was burned, starving, and completely alone in the world. He put it on. The pain stopped immediately. That was the first thing. The burn wounds went quiet like someone had reached in and turned off the signal. His legs steadied. His hands stopped shaking. He felt his body recalibrate into something faster and lighter and more capable than it had any right to feel given the last week of his life. He stood in the dark shrine and actually felt grateful. That feeling lasted about 1 day. The first night he tried to remove it, he couldn't. The clasps moved, but the armor didn't. He pulled and twisted, and the edges just held against skin, too close against skin. And when he pressed his hand to the inside surface, expecting cold metal, he felt warmth instead. Skin temperature warmth, like something alive was on the other side of it. He told himself it was body heat. He almost believed it. This is where things get genuinely bad and they don't get better. By the third day, the armor was moving slightly before he moved. Small things, his arm raising half a second before he decided to raise it. His body turning toward a sound before his brain registered the sound. He kept noticing his hands and not quite recognizing them. Not because they looked different, because they didn't feel like they were receiving signals from him anymore. Then on the fourth night, lying in the dark, he heard the voice. Not outside, inside, somewhere behind his own thoughts, sitting in his head like it had always been there and he'd just never been quiet enough to notice. "You are not the first," it said. "You will not be the last." Ren pressed his palms against the sides of his head, which accomplished nothing at all. The voice wasn't Kuroha, wasn't Akaishi. It was older than both, carrying the specific cold fury of someone who had been wronged by both clans long before Ron was born. A warlord, betrayed and killed by an alliance that included ancestors from each side. His soul had been bound into the armor by something Ren didn't have the knowledge to understand, and it had been waiting in that shrine for the right moment. A desperate survivor of exactly the right massacre was apparently the right moment. Pay attention here because this part is important. The change didn't happen all at once, which somehow made it worse. Day 5. Ren found himself standing outside the shrine holding his sword and couldn't remember walking out there. Day 6. He woke up with dirt on his feet and no memory of the night. Day 7. He tried to say his own name out loud and what came out of his throat was wrong, lower, flatter, carrying a resonance that wasn't his voice using his voice. "I am not you," he said, directing it inward, toward the presence that sat behind his thoughts. "You are only the body," it replied. Simple as that. Not cruel exactly. Just factual, the way you'd explain something obvious to someone who should already understand. By the end of the second week, he was fighting it for his hands every morning and losing ground daily. The Akaishi samurai started dying one by one and nobody ever heard anything. Soldiers found at their posts, cut cleanly, no struggle. Patrols that went into the forest and didn't come back. When bodies were recovered, they were arranged, deliberately, carefully arranged. In the same positions the Kuroha dead had been left in after the massacre. The Akaishi commander recognized the positioning immediately and didn't sleep properly again after that. No sound, no witnesses, no tracks that trackers could follow for more than 50 feet before they simply ended. One by one, like a list being worked through. The last night was quiet in the way that means something has finished rather than something is at peace. The armored figure stood at the edge of the Akaishi compound in the gray pre-dawn light. Bodies around it. The revenge was done, the list complete, both clans now equally erased from Mikawa Prefecture. It stood completely still. No movement, no breath that you could see. Then it turned its head. Slowly, too far, past the angle a human neck allows, continuing past that point without stopping, in the smooth mechanical way of something that is wearing a body rather than living in one. It turned until it was looking back the way it had come, toward the forest, toward the shrine, toward whatever was next on an agenda that had nothing to do with Ren anymore. Ren was still in there somewhere, probably, but the thing looking out through his eyes wasn't him and hadn't been for some time. Both clans were gone. The province went quiet. Travelers passing through in the following years described a figure they occasionally glimpsed at the tree line at dusk. Black armor, standing still, watching the road. Nobody who went to look at it closely came back to describe what they saw. The clans were gone, but the hatred remained, now wearing a new body, and it had nowhere it needed to be. They found it by accident, the way most terrible things are found. For samurai, 2 days out from the battle at Kaidan Ridge, moving through mountain trails that nobody had properly mapped because nobody who lived in these mountains particularly wanted visitors. The snow had started coming down in the late afternoon, and they needed shelter and heat and the kind of stillness that comes after fighting, when the body is done with violence but the mind hasn't received the message yet. Daichi found it first. He came through a gap between two rock faces and stopped, and the others nearly walked into him. A hot spring, natural, tucked into a bowl of dark stone, steam rising off the surface in slow, lazy columns that climbed and dissolved into the cold mountain air. The water was perfectly clear. You could see the pale stone bottom. It smelled of minerals and heat and something faintly sweet underneath both. Nobody said anything for a moment. After 2 days of frozen ground and cold rations and the particular exhaustion that follows a battle where people you knew did not survive, a hot spring in the mountains felt less like luck and more like something owed. Daichi was the youngest of them, 19 years old. He had been given his sword 8 months ago, and Kaidan Ridge had been his first real engagement, and he had spent most of it carrying messages between commanders rather than fighting. His hands were clean in the way that mattered. He stepped in first. The water received him normally, clear and hot and genuinely wonderful, the heat climbing his legs and loosening things in his back that had been tight for days. He exhaled slowly and sank to his shoulders and looked up at the gray winter sky and felt, for the first time in 2 days, like a person rather than a body moving through cold air. The other three watched him from the edge, relaxed by degrees, unslung their weapons, began removing armor. Mori went in second. Mori was 34. He had fought in 9 campaigns. He waded in from the far side of the spring, hissing at the heat, and then went still. He looked down. Below the surface, maybe 2 feet down, a face looked back up at him. Pale eyes open. Not a reflection. The features were wrong, unfamiliar. A man he didn't recognize with a cut across his forehead that had long since stopped bleeding. Just floating there below the surface, looking up at him without expression. Mori took a breath and said nothing. He told himself it was a trick of the steam and the stone. He told himself the mind after battle does unreliable things. Then a second face appeared beside the first. Then a third. Then more, spreading outward across the bottom of the spring like something waking up slowly, unhurried. The way a crowd fills a space when it has nowhere else to be. Some burned. Some with wounds he recognized the shape of. Some with eyes missing and some with mouths open, and all of them, every single one, slowly tilting upward to look directly at him. He said Mori's name from the edge. Mori didn't answer. The hands came up next. Fingers first, breaking the surface without sound. Reaching upward with the slow certainty of things that are not in any hurry because they already know how this ends. Rotting fingers, gray and waterlogged and patient. They found his legs and they held on, and Mori finally made a sound. Not quite a scream, something worse than a scream. The sound of a man who has understood something completely and does not want to have understood it. The water turned red. Not quickly, gradually, spreading from the center outward, thickening as it spread until it moved less like water and more like something that water has no business resembling. Heavy, reluctant, pulling. The 2 remaining samurai on the bank stood frozen for exactly the wrong amount of time. By the time they moved toward him, Mori was already below the surface. They could see him through. The red hands on his arms and shoulders and throat, dragging him down toward the faces that had been waiting since the spring first learned what he was. He looked up through the bloody water at the pale winter sky, and his mouth was open, and then it wasn't. The spring went quiet. Then the third samurai stepped back, and his foot found the edge of the water by accident, and the surface immediately bloomed with faces beneath his boot, and he ran. He ran without his sword or his armor or his name. He just ran down the mountain trail in the snow, and he kept running until the trail became a road, and the road became a village, and the village became walls around him, and he finally stopped. He was the only one. Daichi, still in the spring when everything happened, was simply gone by the time the red cleared. No body, no sound. The fourth man had not entered at all and stood on the bank shaking until the red faded back to clear and the steam rose peacefully and the stone bottom was pale and empty and gave nothing back. He walked for 3 days before he reached his hometown. On the fourth morning he woke up and his arms were bleeding. Not from wounds. From his skin directly, slow and sourceless, the way water bleeds through stone. He pressed cloth against it and it soaked through. He told his wife it was nothing. By the end of the week, his reflection in water showed something behind his eyes that had not been there before. Something that looked, he thought, like it was waiting. The spring in Toriyama still sits between those two rock faces. Travelers passing through the mountain occasionally report finding it, always in winter, always by accident. They describe the water as perfectly clear. The ones who come back describe it that way. The ones who don't, nobody describes anything. Everyone in Kagewara village knew Yui. Not just because she was beautiful, though she was the kind of beautiful that makes people stop mid-sentence when she walked past. They knew her because she was kind in a quiet, unassuming way. She remembered old men's names. She brought extra rice to families who were struggling without making it into anything. When the local daimyo, Lord Hayashi, announced his intention to take her as his bride, nobody in the village was surprised. Felt correct, like something that was always going to happen eventually. But something worse happened. She died 4 days before the wedding. No illness, no injury anyone could explain. She simply did not wake up one morning. And by the time the village understood what had happened, she was already being prepared for burial. The wedding kimono, white silk, hand-stitched with silver cranes, was folded and put away. Lord Hayashi received the news and said nothing publicly. The village grieved in that particular heavy silence reserved for people who had no business dying yet. They buried her on the hillside above the river. That should have been the end of it. It really should have. It wasn't. 11 days later, and remember this number, 11 days, a farmer named Goro was coming back from his field at the edge of the village well past dark. Tired, cold, moving fast because supper was waiting. He was passing the narrow path between the outer houses when he saw her. A woman in a white wedding kimono, walking ahead of him into the village. Slow and straight-backed, the way women walk during ceremonies. The silver cranes on the fabric caught the moonlight and Goro stopped walking completely. He told himself it was someone else. Another woman. A resemblance. He was tired and the light was bad and the mind does strange things when both of those are true. He stood there and watched her turn the corner toward the Nakamura house, Yui's family home, and disappear. He went home, said nothing to his wife, stared at the ceiling until morning. But here's the thing, by sunrise the entire village already knew. Yui had come home. She was sitting in her family's house. She had not spoken. She had not eaten. She sat in the corner of the main room with her hands folded in her lap and her face turned slightly toward the wall. And she breathed, which was more than a dead woman had any right to do. Her mother wept and held her and Yui did not hold her back. She just sat there, still as furniture, quiet as an empty room. Some villagers called it divine, a miracle, heaven returning what death had taken too soon. Others quietly made signs against evil and kept their doors shut after dark. A priest came from the nearest temple, looked at Yui for a long time without speaking, told the family to burn incense and pray, and then left before sunset, faster than he had arrived. Nobody said what they were actually thinking. This is where things start getting uncomfortable. About a week after Yui returned, the nights changed. Not in any way you could point to directly. Just a feeling at first, something slightly off about the air after dark. And then people started noticing that on certain nights the insects went completely quiet. Not gradually, all at once, like someone had reached into the night and turned off a switch. Dogs refused to go outside. Children woke up crying without being able to say why. Then came the lake. A woman went to fetch water from the lake at the village edge one evening. Normal thing she did every other day. She came back without her bucket, shaking so badly her hands couldn't hold anything. When she finally managed to speak, she said there was a figure standing on the surface of the water. Not at the edge, not waiting, standing on top of the water in the middle of the lake. White kimono, perfectly still, just standing there facing the village. 3 men went to check. The lake was empty, black flat water, nothing on it, nothing near it. They came back and said the woman was imagining things. But nobody went near that lake after dark again. Nobody. And honestly, that part about the lake, that's not even close to the worst of it. Keep listening. After the lake, the sightings started coming faster. This is where everything really started. Someone saw her standing between the rows of a farm field at midnight, just standing there among the crops doing nothing. Someone else saw her at their door in the early hours, just standing on the other side of the screen, completely still. And when they finally got the nerve to look properly, she was already gone. One family woke up to knocking. Soft, slow, evenly spaced knocking at their front door in the middle of the night. The father opened it and found nothing outside but cold air and the smell of river water. River water. She had been buried on the hillside above the river. An old woman swore she woke one night and felt something standing beside her sleeping mat. A heaviness in the air, a coldness that didn't belong there. She kept her eyes closed and didn't move and lay there barely breathing until finally, after what felt like a very long time, the feeling slowly moved away. She did not sleep again until full daylight. Now here's what nobody in the village knew yet. Something had already happened. That would have changed everything if anyone had just spoken up about it. Yui's brother Kenji had not been able to bring himself to speak to her since she came back. He couldn't explain it in any way that made sense. She was his sister. She was right there in the same house. But the stillness of her, the way she never started a conversation, never turned toward anyone unless they were standing directly in front of her, never seemed to register anything happening around her. It put a distance between them that felt wrong and heavy, and he didn't know what to do with it. On the 14th night after her return, he saw her from his window. She was walking along the riverbank alone in the dark. White kimono moving slowly. He watched her for a moment, then pulled his coat on and went outside. He told himself he just wanted to make sure she was all right. He came down the bank path quickly, calling her name softly. She stopped walking. He came up behind her and reached out and touched her shoulder, and she turned around to face him. Okay. This next part, you genuinely do not want to skip this. He saw her face, except there was no face, just skin. Smooth, unbroken skin pulled flat across the front of her head where her eyes and nose and mouth should have been. No features, no openings, nothing. Just a pale, continuous surface, faintly glowing in the moonlight, tilted toward him in the exact way a face tilts when it is looking directly at you. Kenji ran. He ran back up the bank and through the village lanes and into his house and pushed himself into the furthest corner from the door and sat there on the floor until morning. He never told a single person what he saw that night. Not his mother, who cried every day. Not his closest friend. Nobody. He packed his things 3 days later, left without saying goodbye, and never came back to Kajwara for the rest of his life. He took that smooth, pale image with him, carried it behind his eyes every single day. And because he never told anyone, the village had no idea what was actually walking around in Yui's kimono at night. That silence cost people their lives. And this is where it gets truly horrifying. The disappearances started the following week. A farmer coming home late from the outer fields. A merchant's assistant on the road from the next town after dark. A village official who stayed too late drinking and left for home just past midnight. Found the next morning, each of them near the road or the river, always face down. When people turned them over, they screamed. Several people who were there that morning said they never fully recovered from what they saw, because the faces were just gone. Not cut, not torn, not removed by any blade or animal. Simply absent. Smooth, pale skin where the features had been. Seamless, like the inside of a mask. Like a face that was never there to begin with. The village elder called an emergency gathering. The priest was sent for again, this time with sutras and rope charms and incense and the expression of a man quietly questioning every decision that had led him to this particular village. Someone finally asked the question out loud. What does she want? An old man in the back of the gathering, who hadn't said a word the entire time, slowly looked up from the floor. She doesn't want anything back, he said quietly. She's not searching for what she lost. He paused for a moment. She's choosing. The room went completely silent. Outside, wind moved through the empty lanes. Somewhere near the river, a dog barked once. Sharp and sudden, and then went totally quiet. The lanterns flickered. And somewhere in the village, in a dark house that hadn't had its door properly latched, there came the sound of slow, soft, evenly spaced knocking. Knock. 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 Nobody moved to answer it. The faces of the dead were never explained. The priest performed rites for 3 days and left on the 4th and never spoke of Kajwara again. Yui's family house was found empty one morning shortly after. Her mother, her remaining siblings, all gone without a trace. No bodies were ever found. Only the wedding kimono was left behind, folded neatly in the center of the empty room. The silver cranes on the fabric, villagers said, were facing inward, like they were looking at something on the inside. The night is quiet again. Rest well, until the next story. And if you found yourself listening a little too closely, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this with those who prefer their stories just before sleep.